What's up, everybody? Episode 3 of the What Do I Do If series. Today we're going to be talking about what do I do if my knees hurt when squatting. Stay tuned. So, first things that we need to be looking at with squatting and knee pain is, can we make a change in our technique? And if that fixes the problem, then that's all we need to work on. So technique things are the easiest things to fix, because if you can mentally just make the fix and it solves it, then it's easy and we don't really need to go through any of the other tests here. So a few things here with our technique. Most common one is people not knowing where to put their feet on a squat. And this is kind of a challenging one because everybody's going to be a little bit different here. But what I found works really, really well for most people is to pick up a heavy sandbag and attempt to do a squat. And wherever you put your feet there for a heavy sandbag squat is about where you need to have your feet for a barbell squat. But generally, we're looking for our feet just outside of our hips. This may change from person to person. We want toes pointed slightly out. Again, this may change from person to person, so you're going to have to play with different ways to do the squat to see what works really well for you. So if it's not a foot width and it's not a toes out issue, then we can go ahead and see if it's a hip problem. So if in your technique your feet are in the right position, but when you start the squat, you just initially just drive your knees straight forward and the hips don't go back or down, they just kind of go forward, then that's going to put a lot of stress in your knee. And while having knees over the toes isn't a problem, having a barbell on your back and shoving your hips and knees forward onto your toes is not necessarily the best thing for it. So instead, what we want to do is sit your butt back and bend your knees at the same time, so that your joints are going in opposite directions. Hips go back, knees go forward as you go down. See if that fixes it. If it takes off the stress, perfect. We can try different angles of our hips, so pointing our hips more out or in, depending on your lib lengths, depending on how your hips open up. This could be this is going to be drastically different from person to person. So try different things with where your hips are pointing. All right. Next thing that we want to do is check ankle range of motion. Sometimes if the ankles have limited range of motion, then as you get lower into your squat, your knee can't go forward over your feet anymore. So then you will start to sit onto your toes, which will put a little bit more pressure on your knee. And so if that's the case, then what you can do is look up the Active Life, look up their ankle range of motion test, which is essentially put your toes about 4.5 inches away from a wall, and then leaving your whole foot flat on the ground, drive your knee to see if it can touch the wall. And if it can, then you probably have adequate range of motion. If it can't, then you might need to start working on that a little bit more. And then the last thing, or not the last thing, but if it is ankle range of motion, does the problem get fixed by wearing a weightlifting shoe? So for those of you guys who don't know, a weightlifting shoe has a usually about an inch heel on it, and it's a solid heel. And so what that does is it compensates for your limited range of motion. And if that fixes the problem, then by all means, I would just use that. Now here's the last thing, is if your knees hurt when you're squatting with a barbell, but do they hurt when you are doing sandbag squats? So a sandbag bear hug squat is what I mean here. If the problem doesn't happen on a sandbag squat, but it does happen on a barbell squat, the squat itself isn't the problem, it's the tool that you're squatting with. So for a while, it might not be a bad idea to step away from a barbell squat and stick to sandbag squats if they feel better, to build up strength in whatever areas you might be lacking, and then go back to a barbell squat and try and see if you can feel that barbell squat the way that you do on a sandbag squat. So you're kind of using one tool that feels safe to learn how to move it to another tool and make that feel safe. And I found that usually works pretty well for people. Now, if technique is not a problem, then we need to assess strength. All right, so strength, I've found most people most people who have knee pain when they are squatting tend to have weak glutes and hamstrings. This fits almost every single person that I've done assessments with very few exceptions. So a few simple tests that I found here. If it is a glute or a hamstring issue, we can assess this by doing hamstring curls. So if you do a seated hamstring curl, can you get both hamstrings to cramp? If you can, then at least we know that your hamstrings are functional and that you can feel them. You have a good mind muscle connection to them. Switching it over now to a prone hamstring curl where you're laying down. If you can do a hamstring curl and get your hamstrings to cramp there while also keeping your glutes engaged by tucking your butt under and squeezing as tight as you can, then it might not be a glute or hamstring issue. Right? But for most people, I found either can't do the hamstring curl and get it to cramp, or when they do the prone version, can't keep their butt engaged and pushed down into the ground. And so those will tell you whether it's just a hamstring issue or whether it's a hamstring and glute issue. This doesn't mean that the muscle's not working, it just means that it's not super strong. That's about it. If you can do both of those, then the next test that we're going to move into is the Bulgarian split squat. I found that people who can squat, but it causes issues in their knee, typically are very strong. They're just not strong in the right areas. So the Bulgarian split squat seems to fix a lot of problems for most people. The benchmark that we found works for a lot of people is 40% of your back squat for 6 reps. So that means holding 2 dumbbells down by your side or holding 1 dumbbell up in the goblet position. 40% of your back squat for 6 reps. This is obviously going to be a little bit different if you're a high-level power lifter because you've specialized in the barbell. So that percentage may need to go down a little bit, but this works for people who are in that mid-range of strength. If you cannot do that, I would spend time working on your Bulgarian split squats and building up your strength in that. We found with one of our lifters who had kind of stalled in the back squat for a long time and hadn't been able to really make PRs in it, and it also just didn't feel good. When we stopped doing back squats and switched over to doing heavy Bulgarian split squats, we also did leg presses as well. But getting the Bulgarian split squat strength up to, she got up to 50% of her squat. The knee pain started going away, and she made PRs in her front squat and her back squat. So something to keep in mind, maybe you just need to step away from the barbell back squat and focus a little bit more on other accessory exercises to build up single leg strength from side to side, as well as just build strength in areas that you are not normally getting with the tool that you're using. The last thing to assess, this is very rarely the issue, but sometimes it is are the quads a weakness? So if the quads are a weakness, it's just going to make the standing up portion of the squat a little bit harder. And if they are weak, then a lot of the time your knee will lock without actually having or keeping tension in the muscle. And so that can put some stress in your knee and hyperextend it sometimes. So what we found as a really good test is if the person has weak VMOs, which is that inside quad, the one on the inside of the knee, then give them reverse sled drags, which are a great way to build up muscle endurance in the quad and build up a lot of muscle there without making the athlete extremely sore. So if a person cannot do 2 sets of 200 feet reverse sled drags at body weight without their quads just giving out, then more than likely they need to spend some time working on their VMOs. So hitting reverse sled drags 2 to 3 times a week is going to be a great way to build up some muscle in the area that is lacking. And that is essentially it. So that gives you kind of a lot of things to work on. The technique stuff especially, there's a lot of small details to play around with. But if you know it's not your technique and you've gone through all of these things and tried it and it still doesn't fix it, then it's probably a strength issue. And if the strength issue is not fixed, then it might be a good idea to go see a PT and see if you've actually had some sort of damage to your knee. And if you have, go through whatever recommendations they want you to do first, and then maybe come back to this once you are back to a healthy point. That's it, guys. If you like this, please shoot me a message with more topics that you want me to go in depth on. I will catch you guys later.